One of the features that really sets OmniFocus apart from some of its competitors is the different types of projects that you're able to create within the application. And it has three core types of these, and it's something that I haven't seen in any other application where you can have what OmniFocus calls a parallel project, a sequential project, and a single actions project. And we're going to go through what each of those are, but the part that's important is that rarely are you going to have a system where every single project is identical. There are some instances where I've seen people use OmniFocus to manage, say, a winery, and they have a project for each section of the vineyard. And whenever they do that, that's their main purpose. It's the only thing that they use it for. So obviously in that case, if everything's the same, every project's going to be identical. But most of us don't operate that way. We typically have multiple types of projects that we're going to be working with. And if we take David Allen's definition of a project, where anything that takes more than one step to complete, it's easy to see that we can get up to about 100 projects in our lives pretty quickly. And we're going to see how that can play out right here. So one of the first things that I always do whenever I see someone jumping into OmniFocus for the first time is turn on this inspector. It's just one of those things that has a lot of power, and that's where a lot of your project level metadata can be altered, which we'll get into all the details of that in a different video. But for now, I want to focus specifically on one piece of that, and that is the type of project. So if you see here, you'll see that there is this type. And if I click on that drop down, you'll see the parallel, sequential, and single actions. Now, what parallel means, and as I'm looking at this design website for Google, so Google has asked me to rebuild their website. Kind of a tall task, I know. But in this particular case, there are 3 steps that I can take on that project, but I can do any one of those all at one time. Like all of those are something that I can do right now to move that project forward. I'm not dependent on one or the other in order to complete a different one. I can create that base quote. I can do that at the same time that I'm searching for designs that fit the company. I can also call Larry about their server setup to discuss how their server farms are to be designed. I can do any one of these at the same time, and that will allow me to continue to progress that project in an instant. And it's pretty easy. Anytime I add a new task to that, boom, I have a new task for them. Anytime I do that, you can see that it's readily available right away. Now, let's move on to a much more complicated setup, and that is whenever you have a sequential project. Now, if you're looking at this, this is actually my real template that I use whenever I write a blog post and when I write an article. And in this case, the title of this article is Reading Books. Now, something you'll notice here is that this first task, the text in it is slightly darker than the rest of them. The rest of these, as we go down, are all grayed out slightly. And the purpose for that is that the first one is available, and the remaining of those are just that. They're remaining, but they're not available for work. And that's because I have this project set up as a sequential project, as you can see here. Now, what that means is that whenever I'm in work mode, because we're looking at planning mode from the project side, when you shift over to work mode in the context side of things, it means that the first task in that is the only one available. So if you look at some of these, specifically if you look at the context, like on these two, it says MacBook Pro for the context there. Now, if I switch over to the context view, and I look at the MacBook Pro side of things, you'll see that that doesn't show up. Those two tasks are not there. They're not available for work because I still have to complete the first task in that project before I can get to work on it. So if we go back over to the project side, those two tasks are not available for work. And that's where the power of this sequential project piece comes in. That's where I have to complete the first one before I can move on to the others. And that particular feature is one that I don't see anywhere else in the task management world. So I think that's a core feature that you want to really consider if you're trying to get into OmniFocus or you're learning about it. Learn how to leverage that. Now, something you're going to see here is if you look at this particular project, I have some groups. So I have this one for the parallel streams, and I have another for social media. Now, if I go into this parallel streams, I have two more. So I've got the text for an article, I've got the picture for an article. Let's open up both of those and just take a little bit closer look at them. Something that you can do to really create a complex project, if you know the entirety of it from start to finish, you can go into these groupings. So if you look at this group here and look at the type of it, it is parallel, whereas the main project is sequential. And likewise, if I go down to the next actions for text, that one also is parallel. So what happens is I'm working down through these. I write the article, I transcribe it because I'm weird and I write all of my articles on paper. So I transcribe them into the computer when I'm done. I have a weird system for writing an article, but once I have those first 4 steps done, what that then allows me to do is I have one where I'm waiting on, my wife is my editor, so I'm waiting for Becky to finish editing that post. But at the same time, I can also be creating and picking the featured picture for that article. So I can be waiting on her, but I can still keep moving forward on it. And it just allows me to have those 2 streams of work going on at the same time. Now, once I get all of the actions for the picture done and all of the actions for the text are done, then I'm done with the parallel streams piece. That part goes away. And then I can go on through the process of running it through my static site generator, which is Jekyll, and then I can move forward to the promotion piece down in the social media part of that project. Now, that's all really complex. That's likely over your head if you're new to this, but the important part here is that the type between parallel and sequential can work in these kind of sub-project level groupings, and that's what allows you to really create a really intricate project if you want. Now, I would tell you, be careful with this. If you don't know the entirety of a project from start to finish, this can get kind of unruly. It can get to where it's too complicated. If you don't know it from the start to the finish, it's going to be hard to lay out all of the steps that you need for it. You could do it all, but you get the first 2 done and it's all going to change. It's only whenever you know the whole process, because you've done it before, you've done it multiple times, that's whenever I'll build out a project that's sequential from start to finish in all its glory. So that's the only time I do that. It's why I'm using this template here, because it's one that I know. I've worked it multiple times, and I know it's to a T as far as clarity. So it's just how it works top to bottom. If I didn't understand a project, and the way I have a lot of my preferences set up is to leave projects as parallel at the very beginning, much like this design website for Google project. That one, I know that I don't have all the information to complete it from start to finish. I don't know how that client is going to react. I don't know what they're going to throw at me. It's just going to morph over time. So I need to be able to just throw things into them as they come up, define a new task whenever I need to, and move on. And so the vast majority of my projects are parallel projects, and I would recommend that you do the same. Otherwise, it gets too complex and it gets too complicated very, very quickly. Now, the last one that we haven't talked about here is the single actions project. So again, if you look at the type, this is a single actions project. Now, from a functional standpoint, this is almost identical to a parallel project. And the reason I say that is because it operates the same. They're all available at any given time, and they are always going to have unless you have a defer date on them, every task will show up in the context view because that's your working view. It's not sequential. You don't typically run subgroups through this, though I think you can. The key difference here is that whenever OmniFocus gets into some of the perspectives and it's starting to look for like stalled projects that don't have any tasks assigned to them, the single actions lists, the single actions projects, those don't show up in those lists. It's only whenever it's a technical project or a parallel project that it will show up in those lists. So it is important to make a distinction between the two, but just know that from a functional standpoint, they operate the same. The only way that I try to clarify between the two is that a single actions list is just kind of a loose collection of actions that need to happen within a general area. So we'll talk about the areas of responsibility a little later in another video. But what I'll do is I'll keep a separate single actions list like what we see here for the house and car to collect the actions I have for that area. And it just kind of pulls them out of the regular stream of things so that I'm not cluttering up the rest of my projects with it. So that's where I'll get things like wash the truck, replacing light bulbs, taking out the trash. Simple things that need to happen, but they're just one-off tasks. They don't really apply to a project. And that's where I'll have these collect. So overall, that's what your differences here are. You've got the parallel project, you have the sequential project, and you have the single actions list. But each of those are going to have specific differences that you need to consider. Again, the bulk of those are going to be in the parallel side, and that's where I would suggest that you set your defaults and that you work with for the most part. But if you understand the details of a project from start to finish, go with sequential. Spell it all out. That way you don't have to worry about what comes next and constantly be redefining things and trying to ask yourself what comes next. You already know what comes next. Just spell it all out from the beginning. So those are your key differences between those three.